complex policy landscape, the private sector certainly plays an increasingly critical role in shaping and implementing national policies, particularly those that have very strong impact on economic development, jobs creation, and food security. And yet, that engagement between think tank, between governments, development partners, and the private sector remains fragmented and often unstructured, which therefore limits the potential for effective partnerships that can drive that meaningful policy reform and implementation that we need. Some of us have very strong biases against the private sector. In many situations, the private sector is seen as evil. The private sector is seen as that sector that believes only in profits. We conveniently forget that the private sector pays taxes, creates jobs, but yet we think, oh, they make too much profits. And so engagement with private sector is, we always find the private sector missing in action. But I think, and that also means they don't usually find a seat on the table. They are not invited. They're usually seen as afterthoughts. They're invited to some of these meetings as mere afterthoughts. But there's a growing recognition that the private sector involvement is vital, not only in creating market and investment opportunities, but also in grounding policy through evidence-based approaches. The private sector, private enterprises, we know by nature of their operational models, they have access to very crucial data. They also generate their own data as well and insights that can inform policy making. However, effective engagement with the private sector requires very deliberate, very intentional strategies that should go beyond transactional relationships. Think tanks, development partners, governments must actively seek out partnerships where the private sector can contribute to policy dialogue, provide feedback on the feasibility of proposed reforms, and help to validate data and evidence to inform decision making. So this session today will provide some key perspectives on how think tanks, development partners, and governments can effectively engage the private sector. It will create an opportunity for us to understand the incentives that shape business decisions and foster deeper cooperation through public-private partnerships. And so in the next 60 minutes, we would examine, 60 to 75 minutes max, we would examine how private enterprises contribute to policy execution and the ways they can help validate data, evidence, and shape effective policies. We would also discuss strategies for building meaningful partnerships between the public sector, private sector, development partners to drive cooperation and ensure that policies are actionable. We would use this next hour or so to gain insights into the factors that influence private sector decision-making, particularly under the evolving business environments that we find ourselves in, and how these insights could inform more effective policy making. And lastly, we would share success stories and best practices of effective private sector engagement in policy development and implementation, particularly in sectors such as agriculture, manufacturing, and finance. A clear expected outcome would be our ability to identify how to build sustainable and effective public-private partnerships that can drive policy implementation. The format of our conversations this morning will be, we would have a keynote address, and our keynote speaker has been allocated 20 minutes. I trust that she We'll do that in 15 minutes. If she's able to do it for less, that would be great. We would have 3 fireside chats. And that's where we would have to really be very brutal and strict with our timing. Each fireside chat is expected to last for 15 minutes. And what that means is I would give the panelists only 3 minutes to articulate their key messages. So, and we would have a first set, they will have 15 minutes, they would leave the stage, another set would come in. So we will reduce the drama, which means that as one set is going down, the other set is coming up. So you please, I would like to crave your indulgence if I do get a little bit brutal and aggressive with my time management. I'm usually calm, but but sometimes things happen. Great. So without wasting so much time, let's invite our keynote speaker, who would be joining us online, Dr. Maria Wanzala. Maria Wanzala is the Vice President for Policy at EFAP. Yeah, Maria is already there. So, Maria will provide us with a presentation on the role in policy implementation, which will focus on agriculture and value chain development. Maria, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Can you see my screen?
Hello, Maria, you there?
What's happening? Okay.
We might need to put your presentation on slide mode. We can't hear you very clearly.
All right. What happened here?
No, we still can't hear you very clearly, Maria. Our IT colleagues, can you please handle this? Maria, you can try again.
Morning, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Okay, and you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
All right, we're in business. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Larry, for the introduction, and thank you, colleagues. Let me dive into my presentation in the interests of time. So my presentation this morning is titled The Role of the Private Sector in Policy Implementation, a Case of Input Value Chain Development in Agriculture. And what I'd like to do this morning is draw on my experiences with AFAP with regards to policy engagement between the public and private sector to do the following. First, present using some examples the spectrum of policy engagement mechanisms, and by this I mean public-private dialogues as well as other structured or ad hoc mechanisms that can be used to engage government and other stakeholders in policy design and implementation. Secondly, I'll seek to provide an idea of the variation in success of these policy engagement mechanisms. And third, based on these experiences, I'd like to provide a sense of the principles and approaches that are most likely to foster partnerships between the public and the private sector, and that correlate with successful outcomes. So there are essentially 4 types of policy engagement mechanisms that I'd like to talk about. The first type, and I seem to have lost my, The first type is ad hoc engagement. And this typically refers to a situation whereby ad hoc bodies such as committees, task forces, or working groups are deployed by government on a temporary or a short-term basis to respond to a crisis. But they can also be deployed by a private body or a development organization to help it respond to a perceived crisis in the policy space. And I'd like to give you 3 examples from the fertilizer space to illustrate. So in the first example, we can think in terms of a private company that hires a consultant to conduct a regulatory impact assessment of a draft fertilizer regulation on behalf of the industry. It then shares the document with the government technical committee, which is in charge of reviewing and finalizing the draft document before it passes up the policy processes towards passage and promulgation. In this way, then, the private sector is able to provide its input into the policy processes through the government committee. A second example comes from AFAP's experiences in Malawi, whereby we contracted a consulting firm to carry out a legal review and analysis of the proposed fertilizer bill in Malawi. So once the legal review had been completed, the AFAP country director and the Fertilizer Association of Malawi, which represents all of the large suppliers in Malawi, presented the findings of the legal review to the task force within the Ministry of Agriculture, which had been tasked with drafting the fertilizer bill. So in this way, the legal review was used as part of the evidence base for the drafting of the fertilizer bill. And then in this way, the private sector was able to provide its input into the policy process. A third example comes from Kenya, where more recently the Fertilizer Association of Kenya hired a local research institution to carry out an assessment of the Kenya subsidy program. And these findings were presented during a conference on fertilizer financing in Nairobi earlier this year. Now, in terms of the outcomes of these three ad hoc interventions, in the first two cases, meaning the regulatory impact assessment and the legal review, the result was that the documents that had previously been prepared by or on behalf of the private sector were given directly to the government technical committee or task force. And in this way, they were used to provide private sector input into the policy processes. However, the other example I gave, the assessment by the local research institution on behalf of the private sector, backfired, unfortunately, because of the way it was presented. It was presented in a public forum with no forewarning of the government, and therefore it came across as an ambush and it was not very well received. The second type of policy engagement mechanism I would like to discuss is focus group discussions, or FGDs. So FGDs involve gathering people from similar backgrounds or experiences to discuss a specific topic or issue in depth, facilitated by an external professional moderator. And I'd like to give you three examples, two from Mozambique and one from Nigeria. So in the first example in Mozambique in 2019, AFAP provided support to both the public and the private sector by convening public-private partnership meetings across the country to review the fertilizer regulations and regulatory implementation tools. These meetings were held in 3 locations across Mozambique, and at each meeting we had representatives from the public and the private sector. Subsequently, these regulations were finalized and they are now being implemented. A second example, also from Mozambique, in 2020, AFAP developed a policy brief on the fertilizer taxation system in Mozambique, and the paper was then used to form the basis of a stakeholders roundtable of sorts. But it was essentially an FGD because it focused again on the public and the private sector actors only. And AFAP, in fact, funded the participation of some agri-dealers as well in this meeting. And the purpose was to discuss the importance of reforming the current fertilizer taxation system in Mozambique. The issue was that only the macronutrients, your NPKs, were exempt from taxation, but the micronutrients, the zincs and the borons, are not tax exempt. And this, of course, increases the price of fertilizer blends, which discourages farmers from using them. So the desired outcome of the meeting really was not so much to change the reform, to reform the policy, but to raise awareness of the issue and begin to mobilize support so that in future, both macro and micronutrients can be tax exempt. So the result is that micronutrients are still taxed in Mozambique, but at least the roundtable raised awareness of the issue, which brings it closer to being addressed effectively. The third example comes from Nigeria. Now, Nigeria has the full spectrum of a fertilizer policy and legal framework. It has a national fertilizer policy, it has a National Fertilizer Quality Control Act, and it also has national fertilizer quality regulations, which were enacted in 2020. And what AFAP did was actually to facilitate private sector input into the regulations by convening 15 focus group discussions of private sector actors across the country to raise awareness about the regulations and to enable them to provide their input. And then we then convened a stakeholder workshop of sorts to synthesize and validate the outcomes of the focus group discussions, and so that they could then be integrated into the final regulations. So the outcome of these FGDs, in essence, were to increase awareness about the regulations among the private sector, to enable the private sector to have some input into these regulations, and then also to raise awareness of outstanding issues, such as the fertilizer taxation issue, which bodes well for the future in terms of having these issues addressed. The third type of policy engagement mechanism I would like to discuss is more formal stakeholder workshops. And these are typically convened to facilitate input from a broad range of stakeholders, including the private sector, on a draft document which has preliminary findings and recommendations. So for our purposes, these sort of documents could be a revised fertilizer policy, or a fertilizer bill or regulations. It could be a proposed change to an existing regulation, or it could be a proposed change to an ongoing program. For example, if the Ministry of Agriculture wants to redesign the subsidy program. So the desired outcome would then be consultations to sensitize the public, raise awareness, and then possibly even validation of the revised policy, regulation, or program. I would like to provide an example of this from the regional level, which I think is quite illustrative, again from AFAP's experience. So last year, AFAP entered an agreement with FAO to provide support to SADC for the development of a regional position paper, which SADC was to take to the Africa Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit in Nairobi. By way of background, this agreement was building on an existing relationship between FAO, SADC, and AFAP, because we actually helped SADC to develop its harmonized fertilizer regulatory framework and its Southern Africa Fertilizer Program. And that Southern Africa Fertilizer Program has actually been approved by the SADC Ministers of Agriculture as the Fertilizer and Soil Health Framework for the implementation of the Africa Fertilizer and Soil Health Action Plan. So back to the regional position paper, following a meeting of the senior leadership of AFAP, SADC, and FAO, AFAP developed SADC's regional position paper in the following manner. It was a highly consultative process. So first we held virtual consultations with stakeholders from the private sector, public sector, civil society, including farmers' organizations, as well as development partners, to get their input on the degree of alignment between the Southern Africa Fertilizer Program and the Africa Fertilizer and Soil Health Action Plan. And then in October of the same year, the SADC Secretariat convened an in-person meeting or stakeholders workshop in South Africa to obtain input to prepare the regional position on the Africa Fertilizer and Soil Health Action Plan. And then after the meeting, the regional position paper was drafted by AFAP using input from the meeting in close collaboration with SADC and FAO, and submitted to SADC for final approval. So the outcome of this regional process then, highly consultative, is a regional position paper for SADC on the alignment between its Southern Africa Fertilizer Program, which is its regional soil health and fertilizer framework, and the continental framework, which included input from the private sector. The fourth type of policy engagement mechanism I would like to discuss is more formal public-private dialogues. AFAP organizes, convenes, and facilitates these dialogues, PPDs, and this is where industry, government, and other stakeholders such as civil society, academia, etc., can meet on a regular basis in a structured manner to identify and resolve policy and regulatory constraints to fertilizer market development. And the purpose is to really promote inclusive policy making and to catalyze policy and regulatory reforms. So I'll give you two examples. First, one from the national level and one from the regional level. So at the national level, last week, November 21st in Nairobi, AFAP co-convened a public-private dialogue in Kenya in collaboration with the Fertilizer Association of Kenya. This PPD was actually convened at the request of the Cabinet Secretary of Agriculture because he wanted to hear evidence on the effect of the subsidy program on the private sector and dialogue with the private sector and other stakeholders on how the subsidy program could be implemented with more private sector involvement. In terms of the outcomes, they were actually very promising. And some of the key ones are as follows. First, the Cabinet Secretary informed the Agri-Dealer Association of Kenya that he would be reaching out to them to include them in the subsidy program for the next season. Secondly, the Cabinet Secretary committed to facilitate discussions between the Ministry of Agriculture and the Fertilizer Association of Kenya to explore how blends can be incorporated into the subsidy program. And this is very significant because the private sector in Kenya has invested a lot of money in blending facilities over the past 8 years, but these investments have been threatened by the subsidy program because the blends were not included in the program. Specifically, the industry invested in 8 blending units and 2 granulation plants over the past 8 years. But many of those facilities are now operating at around 15 to 20% of their capacity. So this is a very significant development if indeed these blends will be included in the subsidy program. And then third, the Cabinet Secretary actually emphasized the importance of public-private dialogues in the implementation of effective fertilizer programs for Kenya. And then I would also like to give you an example of regional PPDs. Between December of 2022 and April of 2023, AFAP carried out needs assessments of the private sector in East, Southern, and West Africa to gain insights on how to support increased domestic private sector investment and engagement in the fertilizer value chains. We then organized 3 regional public-private dialogues to share the findings and recommendations from the assessments with the governments, the regional economic communities, development partners, and other stakeholders. So these regional PPDs were actually very well attended by both the public and the private sector, and they were formatted in such a way that the private sector presented its position, and then representatives from the government and civil society responded. So the outcome was 3 regional private sector position papers, which were endorsed by the stakeholders at the meeting. And these papers outlined some of the key challenges to increase private sector investment and engagement in fertilizer value chains in Africa. They outlined the market and policy constraints that negatively impact fertilizer value chain operations. They also talked about some of the some of the most effective strategies that are used by the private sector to mitigate risks and increase their investment and engagement. And then they also talked about private sector views on the kind of support that they would like to have from the various quarters, the government, the regional economic communities, development partners, and donors. So in terms of the outcomes of these PPDs, I would say they're as follows. First, the Kenya PPD was very successful and effective in convincing the government of the need to take action on issues that are of concern to the private sector. Secondly, the insights that we gained very valuable insights on private sector needs at both the national and the regional level, and many of these insights were actually drawn from the stakeholders who attended these PPDs. And then again, these policy engagements raised awareness not only of issues at the national level, but also at the regional level. So then, drawing on these 4 types of policy engagement mechanisms that I've talked about, the ad hoc engagement, stakeholder workshops, focus group discussions, and PPDs, what lessons can we distill regarding the key elements of a successful policy engagement mechanism? I would say that they're as follows. The first step involves identifying emerging issues that are negatively affecting the fertilizer value chain. The second step is to conduct research to gather evidence and provide a solid foundation for policy engagement. And this evidence-based approach then ensures that the discussions and recommendations are grounded in reality and can lead to practical solutions. The third step is to decide on the most suitable platform or fora to share the information and findings. This can be one-on-one meetings with government, technical committees. There can be more structured meetings with specific groups, such as the focus group discussions, or more formal stakeholder consultations or PPDs, which bring together a larger group of stakeholders. And finally, the fourth step then is to monitor and report on progress in the implementation of the agreements from these meetings, preferably on a quarterly or at least a frequent basis, to maintain momentum and to help to refine the strategies and ensure that these meetings lead to tangible improvements in the input value chain. So then, and then this is my last slide, moderator. What are the fundamental principles for successful outcomes for policy engagement of the private sector, of the government by the private sector, I should say? I would say they're as follows. First, we must have transparency and trust. This is the first port of call. There should be direct communication by the private sector to the government to share its concerns and to share its evidence. This evidence needs to be shared with the government first. It should not be shared in an open forum where the government feels that it's being ambushed. Second, open communication is critical, whereby whichever policy engagement mechanism is selected, the private sector and the government should discuss and seek solutions for their mutual benefit. The third principle is collaboration, and here both parties should willingly participate in whichever forum has been selected, PPD or other, in order to facilitate information exchange and reach mutual agreement. The fourth principle is respect. This means that both of these parties should participate in the fora at the highest levels, or at least at the decision-making level. There's no point sending somebody to a meeting who does not have any authority to make some level of commitment, either from the private sector side or from the government side. And then the final principle is mutual accountability, meaning that both parties should agree to support monitoring and reporting on progress, and they should be responsive to making necessary adjustments along the way in order to keep the agreement on track. With that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you for keeping to time. That was very practical, very, excellent presentation. Before I attempt to summarize some of the key points that I got out from Maria's presentation, I would like to invite our first set of panelists. Like I stated earlier, we would have 3 fireside chat segments, and each one will be 15 minutes. And we have categorized these segments into the various groups. The first groups will be government perspectives from government partners. We're going to get perspectives from pharma and private sector representatives, and we're going to get perspectives of policy think tanks and ANAPRI centers. So let me first invite our first set of panelists, government representatives from South Africa, DRC and Namibia. Dr. Dirk Trotsky, if I invite you, please come right, once you hear your name, please come right straight up. Dr. Trotsky is the Director of Business Planning and Strategy at the Western Cape Department of Agriculture, South Africa. Ms. Alisa Shidika, representing the Ministry of Agriculture, Government of Namibia. Simon Omolo John, representing the Government of Tanzania from the Ministries of Livestock and Fisheries, and Dr. Papa Nohine Dieye, representing USAID Senegal. Thank you. Please put your hands together for our panelists. So, in Maria's excellent presentation, she presented different scenarios, very practical scenarios of PPPs with different outcomes that were achieved. She also articulated for us some key elements, key elements of a successful public-private partnership. We need to be clear about emerging issues, especially those that will negatively affect the subsector and the economy. She stated that research was important, and we need to gather the right evidence, evidence that is realistic and grounded in truth, and that will set the stage for effective policy engagement. She also talked about the need to decide on the best platform to use, best platform and format, and then it was important to monitor and report on progress in implementing the agreement. And then she stated 5 fundamental principles for successful engagement, talking about transparency and trust. And we all know transparency and trust are very scarce commodities these days. Collaboration, open communication, respect, and mutual accountability. Well, let me ask some. Let me start with our Tanzania and Namibia representatives. We know that governments have a crucial role in setting the stage for private sector success. Can you please share specific policy measures your governments have taken to encourage private sector involvement in national development, and what's been the impact so far? We'll start with Alisa, and you have 3 minutes to articulate your key points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Maybe I should start at a policy formulation level. Namibia is a net importer, as we all know, and we have been importing seeds. So what the government has done is to develop a Seed and Seed Varieties Act, and then this was a consultative effort between public and private, because it's the private sector that needs to produce, to process, and even to supply seeds. So as we speak, we have Act number 23 of 2018, Seeds and Seeds Varieties Act, and then also regulations have been developed, and this was really a joint effort between public and private sector. If I have to talk about perhaps on implementation, through stakeholder engagement, especially with farmers, the private sector, which are our farmers, there has been issues of access to market. And through the growth at home strategy, the country or the government has developed a scheme called market share promotion, of which at least farmers are encouraged to produce more and supply. So hence what has happened is that farmers, there's a moratorium to say if you want to supply, like for traders, fruits and vegetables, you have to solicit or you have to source a certain percentage from the local market or domestic economy for you to trade. So in 2012, we had a market share promotion standing at around 35%, but as you speak, it's about 47%. So that encourages our farmers, especially the small scale and the medium scale farmers, to produce, because they have a guaranteed market. So I thank you.
Thank you so much. Please, can we applaud Alisa? Alisa, she basically talked about a clear policy developed by the government of Namibia that recognized the role of private sector, recognized the importance of developing a market share promotion policy, which resulted in increase in domestic market opportunities for farmers in Namibia. Thank you so much for that. Tanzania, do you have any similar experience to share with us?
I start working. Okay, thank you. In Tanzania, we have a similar, as the way she said. In Tanzania, we have got a fertilizer policy. That policy enables the government together with the private sector to cooperate in the supply of the fertilizer up to the farmers level. Another one, we have got the exclusive economic zone. Tanzania has decided to make exclusive economic zone which enable private sector from anywhere to participate and get support on how to operate his or her activities within the country by following the rules and regulations which have been made in the country. Another one, in Tanzania, we are using the technology, this, let's say, mobile technology, to allow the farmers from even from the local areas, so that they can know where the market is. They can sell their products through using the mobile. They know where the market is and where to sell them. Another thing, in Tanzania, we normally encourage private sector, since we know that the private sector is the engine of development. Therefore, we normally encourage private sector to come and participate with us in the country, and they are given the conducive environment for their activities, in which we provide water supply, electricity, and so forth. They are assured that whenever they invest in the country, then their investment will not be in vain. They will make profit, and at the same time, Tanzania will benefit from them through getting employment, getting a tax, and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon. Certainly, your government has been creating the enabling environment that makes it attractive for private sector companies to invest and participate in national development. Thank you so much for those points. Let's move on to South Africa. Dek, you are in the Western Cape, and for those of you who know South Africa, the Western Cape is seen as the blueprint of what provincial or state governments should do. Things are done so well always, to the extent that sometimes we think that it's a different country completely. So Dek would like you to provide some insights into how the Western Cape's government, how you partner with private sector. How have you successfully partnered with local businesses to drive economic transformation, and what lessons can other regions learn from your approach?
Chairperson, 3 minutes is so short I can't even tell a joke. But I want to start, I think this words, 3 words: public, private, partnership. Each of them is incredibly loaded. Let's just, we don't have time to go into detail, but let's just go into this animal called private that government has to engage with. What does that mean in the Western Cape? In the Western Cape, we've got 6,800 commercial farmers. We've got 9,000 odd smallholder farmers. That was 12 o'clock last night when we counted. You know, so that is the private. But then we've also got other businesses, agribusinesses, you know, is playing in our space. So given that magnitude, when one talk about the private and government, we can either enter into an agreement or work with an individual, or we need to work with a collective. And the collective, for instance, the deciduous fruit industry or the wine industry. Okay, so that's the one divide between individuals and between organizations. Then we must also look at the intention of the private sector. It can either be a lobbying activity, or it can be a rent-seeking activity, or it can be an attempt to force government to create an environment within which business can do business. And let's be honest about that. The function of business is to do business, to make a profit. If they don't make a profit, they can't create jobs, they can't produce food and things like that. I think that is the distinction we need to make, and we need to understand that. And I must be very honest with you, that I think in South Africa and the Western Cape, we are not very good at facing lobbying activities. That is strange to us. Either lobbying of individual business, because that happened. You know, there's individual that say, why did we not get a particular grant or not? Or of an industry. And in South Africa, the poultry industry is extremely effective in lobbying. And you see that government don't really know how to manage that. I think that's the one thing. Now, how do we try to manage that? And that is to achieve government's objectives. I think one of the important things is to bring private sector, and quite often then the representatives of private sector, into the fold at the very start of a project. For instance, land reform and support to land reform is extremely important in the Western Cape. So there we've got a commodity approach where we work with commodities to get the solutions that we want. Simple example. If government go to a nursery and say, listen, we want to support a farmer to establish 10 hectares of peaches. The nursery will look around, and there in the corner there will be some old dry peaches, you know, that's close to dying. And they say, okay, you are government, we will sell you this at a premium, not even at a discount, at a premium. If it is the industry representative coming to that same nursery, they will probably give a better quality, a tree, and they will give it at a discount. I think that's where the principle is. That everything said, well, what we do is there are certain things that we work with the private sector where we have got agreements, and an agreement is not an agreement if it's not signed. But then one comes back to the situation is then who takes responsibility and who is accountable for that agreement, because there are 8,000 commercial farmers. If we enter into an agreement with Agriculture Western Cape, how are we as government sure that 8,000 or 6,000 commercial farmers will actually stick to this particular agreement? Because it is a voluntary organization that represents them. I think that's the important thing. So my last sentence, I see you want to stop me, is I think when everything is negotiated, during the negotiation, one must always be careful that we don't agree on the lowest common denominator. Because when you've got civil society and public around the table, they tend to agree on the lowest common denominator where nobody objects against. And then in the end, what you get is not really meaningful. But once you've got that, one need to get into a situation that you reach agreement on what are the deliverables, and personally I believe in not more than 5. What are the deliverables? In other words, it must be clear what is going to be delivered. How will you know that has happened? The second thing is who is responsible for that, and not the Department of Agriculture. It must be a name. There must be a name that's responsible for that, to do that. The third thing is by when. The fourth thing is where's the money going to come from? That is something that we do not often think about. You know, where's the money going to come from? And the fifth thing is obviously the deadline, by when. And there I'm going to stop. Thanks.
Please put your, thank you so much, Dak. I like the fact that you recognize that you don't like being pressured by lobby groups, and that puts you in a situation where you proactively engage private sector partners right from the very beginning. Thank you so much for that. Let's move on to Dr. Papa Dear. Dr. Dear, would like you have been deeply involved in Africa's agricultural space. What lessons have you learned in supporting private sector investments with national and regional policy objectives? What has worked and what has not worked?
Thank you, moderator. I'm gonna give a health break for my friends colleagues, so I'm going to move in French, talk in French. So, because I see since the beginning they have the headphone. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le modérateur. En ce qui concerne les questions de la place du secteur privé au niveau des agricultures africaines et comment influencer les politiques d'une manière générale, il faut reconnaître qu'il y a un changement de paradigme. Moi, je parle basé sur mes 16 ans de recherche sur les politiques avec l'ISRA et puis mes 15 années avec USAID supportant les politiques. Il y a un changement de paradigme. Parce que quand on parle de partenariat public-privé, ça implique beaucoup de choses derrière. Pourquoi il y a un changement de paradigme? Quand on avait de nos indépendances jusqu'aux politiques d'ajustement, on parlait d'État régalien. C'était l'État qui pilotait, qui mettait ses ressources, mettait les financements. C'est l'État qui décidait de pas mal de choses. Mais depuis 30 ans, quand même, nos États ont de plus en plus besoin des ressources du privé, de l'argent du privé. Si on a besoin de l'argent de quelqu'un, comme le privé n'est plus un reform taker. Il doit être un reform driver. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, tous les documents de politique que vous voyez dans nos pays, on parle de partenariat public-privé, mais on parle de combien le privé doit apporter au financement de l'économie. Donc dans ce cas, il faut nécessairement changer de paradigme. Et c'est pourquoi ce changement de paradigme nécessite pour nos États d'apprendre comment s'engager avec le privé. Ce n'est pas évident. Nos administrations, jusqu'à présent, ont du mal à changer de mentalité sur comment s'engager avec le privé, quand s'engager avec le privé, reconnaître les capacités du privé. Parce que le privé a de très fortes capacités pour identifier les réformes, pour informer les réformes, pour influencer les réformes. C'est les trois aspects. Parce qu'ils ont beaucoup d'informations. Moi dans les années 2000, dans les années 90, on avait les import surge de poultry en Afrique de l'Ouest. Ça nous avait beaucoup fatigués. En ce moment, nous, quand on faisait la recherche, c'est le privé qui nous a donné tous les argumentaires pour décider des mesures de sauvegarde. Et c'est le privé qui a été demandé. Le Sénégal est un exemple. Depuis plus de 20 ans, il y a des mesures de sauvegarde sur ce secteur du poultry. C'est le privé. Deuxième exemple qui est plus récent, c'est avec la crise ukrainienne, quand il y a eu l'augmentation des cours du blé au Sénégal, c'est le privé, la Fédération nationale des boulangers, qui a pris ses responsabilités comme driver pour poser le débat sur la détaxation des céréales locales, notamment le levier de la TVA, et comment incorporer plus de céréales locales dans la production de farine pour le pain et les produits de noiserie. Donc aujourd'hui, moi je pense que ce qu'on doit raisonner, c'est, en tant que spécialiste de recherche sur les policiers, comment engager avec le privé, en insistant surtout quels sont ce qu'on a appelé nous dans notre jargon de USAID, dans notre framework, les priority reform agenda. Qu'est-ce que c'est? C'est un aspect qui est très important. Qu'est-ce qui intéresse le privé? Et suivant un momentum précis, parce que le privé aussi n'attend pas le gouvernant, ni les chercheurs. Deuxième aspect qui nous semble important, le privé mettant des ressources, parce que dans notre développement économique, on dit au privé, cette partie-là, ça doit provenir de vous les financements, c'est le mutual accountability. Il est très important. Le mutual accountability n'est pas ici sur le reporting et autres, mais c'est l'identification des réformes, l'élaboration des réformes, la mise en œuvre des réformes, l'évaluation des réformes. Donc, c'est ce que je pouvais dire. Je vous remercie.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you so much. I liked the fact that you clearly called out the fact that there's a paradigm shift, and the state, the public sector, recognizes the importance of private sector, and the need for us to rely a lot on private sector. But what I also like is the fact that you also called out that the public sector needs help. It is challenging for them to accept this paradigm shift at the speed and urgency that we require. Perhaps this might be a task for ANAPRI and its centers. How can you help in supporting and helping our public sector partners in this transition? And this is not just for Senegal only, this applies to all African countries. Well, thank you so much for that intervention. Let's go straight to the audience. I have 3 minutes, and we'll take 3 questions. We don't want any keynote address, just questions. Questions should be 5 seconds, just straight to the point. That's 1, yeah. 2, 3. I'm not seeing any female. I'm a gender supporter. 4. Okay. And let's make that very quickly. Straight to the point, your question, your comment, and which of my panelists you would like to address it. Let's start with you, sir. Where's the microphone, please?
Yeah, assuming the private sector is part of the COPs, community of practitioners, engaging in policy formulation space, how ready are the private sector to share information, if they do have, for the purpose of informing or engaging in policy debates? Do they have R&D departments? These R&D departments, do they have data that can then assist in the debate? Thank you.
So, next question, please. And any of my panelists, you can decide who wants to answer that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think probably directed to the government officials, because one thing is that the moment the countries started shifting into the PPP models, we have been seeing some challenges happening, especially when it comes to the legal aspects. So I wonder if maybe colleagues from the 2 countries, Namibia and Tanzania, if they have any legal framework that is managing the PPP models in those countries. Because I see some of these cases, happening between governments and private. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there legal frameworks that helps to manage effective public-private partnerships? Question number 3.
Thank you very much. Mine is a comment, a very short one. I was very keen on this because I operate quite a bit in this space of dialogue between public and private sector, and I wanted to have consideration maybe put into addressing the kind of organizational structures and primary, secondary, and even tertiary private sector organizations, which then the government can engage in a structured way. And I wanted to give the example of Kenya, so that is among the examples. In Kenya, we have a Kenya Private Sector Association called KEPSA and a Kenya Manufacturer Association, which periodically and consistently engages government in periodic roundtable discussions. But these 2 organizations have affiliations within the various subsectors of the economy, including agriculture, which then contribute. And when the roundtables are done, then they are able to follow up even on implementation. So I wanted this kind of structure maybe to be considered among the few examples which were given, which may look a little episodic.
Yeah.
There's an incident, then it is initiated, it ends with the instance, to also include structured and continuous engagements.
Great.
Through these organizations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so it's calling for organized PPP structures. Would it work in all countries? It's working in Kenya. In what situations do we use those structures? Let's take the fourth question and the last question for this segment to Madam over there.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Je me présente Fatimata Bintou Hassedine Diouf. Je suis dans le conseil agricole. Je suis vraiment avec beaucoup d'intérêt toutes les discussions qu'on nous a faites aujourd'hui, ce matin, surtout pour le partenariat public-privé. Et j'ai bien aimé aussi le discours de Pape Nawin, que je salue au passage, sur le changement de paradigme et comment il faut l'idée ce partenariat public-privé drainé par le secteur privé. Parce qu'ici au Sénégal, surtout dans le cadre du transfert de technologie, nous avons du mal à aller à l'échelle juste parce que le secteur privé n'est pas vraiment engagé dans tout ce qui est développement, multiplication des variétés, pour ce qui est des variétés. Et là aussi, nous sommes en train de beaucoup aller dans le digital. Nous l'avons expérimenté, la digitalisation du conseil agricole, qui nécessite beaucoup de ressources et dont la pérennisation pose problème parce que le secteur privé, en l'occurrence les startups qui sont là, ont du mal à investir. Donc le comment vraiment il faut mettre en œuvre ce partenariat public-privé pose problème. Donc c'est vraiment ça que je voulais partager avec vous. Et s'il y a des pistes de solutions, parce que nous avons des programmes qui sont là et que nous allons mener dans les années à venir pour essayer de consolider et de mettre en œuvre ce partenariat public-privé-là. Certainement, on aura besoin d'assistance, c'est important d'avoir cette assistance-là, mais surtout, comment mettre en œuvre et pérenniser. Merci beaucoup.
No, great, excellent questions there. How do we really scale up? How do we ensure that we are able to engage and help both sectors to actually meet each other? So let's, if you don't mind taking 1 minute each very quickly, if you have any contributions to make. Dek, you want to start, and it's open to the rest of you as well.
No, I just want to comment on the sector, the private sector sharing information on that particular question. Again, it boils down to, are we talking about an individual company or are we talking about the collective? If we're talking about an individual company, it's quite often a board decision or a senior management decision, whether information will be shared or not, and there are specific reasons why they take that decision. Quite often it is then also in terms of rent seeking what they do or not. In terms of the collective, we must make a distinction between established representative organizations that's been coming on for, in the case of South Africa, for 100 years. And on the other hand, you get some fly-by-nights that pop up and say they represent a particular sector, like family farming or whatever. In my experience, the established guys, there are a long-term relation that has been established with them, and a trust relationship. And those are also the guys that, you know, in the paper, quite often there's somebody that's got a particular idea, they run with it, and they've got the cat by the tail. And then it is very useful if the established organization or representation of farmers come in and say, no, you've got the cat by the tail, this is the true story.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you know, sometimes you get people that is not that established with whom that trust relationship has not been established. And then quite often they are not prepared to share information. But normally the established guys are the guys that are going the extra mile to get the information and put it on the table and are aware, because they are long term in the game. They won't try to twist the information to suit their benefits. Because they know 10 years from now, there will be another crisis, something else where they have to put information. Will that information then be trusted? Thanks.
Thank you, Doug. Who wants to go next? Simon?
Okay, thank you. To me, I have to respond. Of course, I'm going to respond to two in one by answering. First of all, there is a legal framework in Tanzania, and there is a structure. Private sector has got its structure from the higher level to the lower level, and as well as the private. And when in partnership, we have got a business partner, public-private partnership, which the chairperson is Her Excellency Mrs. President Samia Suluhu Hassan. Normally, they occur. There is an annual meeting every year where public and private sector meet and make conversation about development issues and so forth, based on the agenda which are being set during that calendar year. Again, there is that information or data to share, as the way I've said. Since they cooperate with us, they collaborate with the government, they participate fully. Whenever there is any activity, then they share with the government information they have. For instance, if the government want to know about the employments which are being created by the private sector, therefore they have to submit. Those are the informations that we have to. If the government want to know something about what is taking place in the private sector, since they have got their structure from the higher to the lower level, then those informations are produced and shared. With those few remarks, let me submit. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. Who wants to go next? Alisa?
Okay, just like Tanzania, Namibia also has a structure. We have a public-private partnership unit within the Ministry of Finance, and it deals with all public-private partnership agreements within the country. It's just a unit. Obviously, it's not a bigger kind of institution. It's a unit, but we are getting there. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Professor, I think we have the structure. For example, if you take the case of Senegal, you have what we call the interprofession, is where you have all the different stakeholders along the value chain. Because if you take today, we have an interprofession in poultry sector, in peanut, in different other sectors. So, and I think the challenge is more on our side as a researcher. Because our tendency is, as we are paid by the government, we are not taking attention to what the private sector is doing. And I think as a network of researchers, we need to open this box. Because today, if you want to help our government in policy formulation and implementation, the government needs to know what the other stakeholders need. What are the real demands in terms of reform? Not making the hypothesis that as a government I have the legitimacy to develop policy, but you are developing policy for people. You are developing policy for the private sector who are putting money. So I think it's where, as a researcher, and we have this experience with BAM in Senegal. Since a long time, it's what we are doing.
Right, yeah.
Second question. C'est là où je parlais justement de la difficulté pour le gouvernement de faire du shift. If you take seed sector today, our feeling is our government, they don't want to move away from the seed sector. What place for the private sector? And it's where I, as a researcher, again, we need to take our responsibility and sometime, as we are talking about policy decision making, give the right information and provide the right ways for our government to do business. Because today you can't say to private sector, hey guys, invest your money in the seed sector, and at the same time you remain in the seed sector as a main driver of policy and implementations of certain strategies.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that's a challenge to all of us here. There's a lot of work for us to do. Could you please join me in putting your hands together for our panelists? So we will take a quick photograph while the other panelists please get ready, because as soon as we take a photographer, we'll do that in 5 seconds. The next group will come on. Thank you so much. Great. So let's invite our next set of panelists, and these are colleagues that will share their perspectives from the pharma and private sector angles. I'd like to invite Mr. Jaimebo Tuagirayezu. Apologies if I am not pronouncing your name properly. He works for the Pan-African Farmer Organization Rwanda. Is he here? A colleague from PAFO Rwanda, Jaimebo Tuagirayezu. Mr. Aruna Dio from LDB had to leave, but he will be replaced by Dr. Ndeye Faye. Well, that's the information I got here. That for the last for the last one, okay. So is he here, Mr. Haraya Dio? No, okay, all right. So we'll carry on. Dr. Sheikh Sadibou Fong, representing IFDC. Mr. Bruce Kasitu from ISDA. So do we have just two folks representing? We have a private sector rep here. We have anybody from a farmer organization that can join? It will be a very brief conversation.
Tinashe, you can come. Tinashe is from Sakau.
Okay, well, thank you, Tinashe. Thank you. Let's put your hands together for Tinashe. Okay, we'll make this very quick. I mean, you guys know the rules. Huh? So we know that the let's start with Bruce, right? Bruce is with ISDA, and this is a question also for you, Sheikh, as well. So both of you would attempt to address this question. The private sector is expected to provide its own thinking around the role of private companies in the implementation of policy, and how this role can be expanded to support some of the priorities that form part of government's mandate. And so the key question is, you have been deeply involved in Africa's agricultural space. What lessons have you learned in aligning business goals with national and regional policy objectives? To be nice for you to share what has worked and what has not worked. And are there cases where private companies have partnered with government to drive the implementation of policies? And this could be in the area of quality control of fertilizers, or collection of levies, or the support of smallholder farmers in input subsidy programs. If you could share some of these examples, that would be great. Who would like to go first? Bruce, do you want to go first? And you have 3 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think before we even get into the detail, listening to a conversation about public-private partnership raises a few concerns because I've been listening to what public-private partnership is. And most of the conversations that I've listened to here allude to public-private engagement and not partnerships, because a partnership is long-term. Secondly, it actually brings out the element of what public service or public asset am I providing through investment or through management of a service that would have been probably provided by government. So what does it mean? It means that private sector has to appreciate the value in policy implementation. Now, what I've heard is that most of the stakeholders here are engaging private sector in dialogue. So, has private sector contributed to policy? Yes, because they are invited and they get their views. Have they been involved in review of policy? Yes, because they get their views and all this. But when it comes to implementation, it becomes complicated. The input sector, seed, fertilizer, might become, it seems obvious. But my sister raised an issue of technology transfer. Private sector has the capacity to scale most of these technologies. But when it comes to implementation, the public sector will tell you that, you know what, how much money are you giving us? So they don't look at the value, but they look at how much are you giving us. So you're implementing policy, but at the same time, they want you to pay for the review and even development of the policy, which creates, for me, an interest of conflict of interest in all this. So how can we actually engage? Number one is, I think it makes a lot of sense when there is value for the private sector, but then I think there is also need to define a framework through which the public and private sector should actually work together, okay? And in the long term. And one of the challenges that we've also, that at least we have encountered in terms of policy implementation is that you work with some of the public sector, and along the way, even the development partners come in and they create a competition, okay? So I think a competition in terms of financing what the private sector is doing instead of partnering in long term on how can we actually engage. I'll stop there for now.
Please put your hands together for him. Your last comment provides a segue for an implementing partner who comes from development agencies to actually chime in here. So Sheikh, do you compete with private sector, or do you come to complement what they bring to the table?
Since time is scarce, I had so much to say, but that's why I didn't take my notes. I will take just one example to share with you, but I will switch in French because my former director told me you have to speak in French. And my former director is the one who organized this event, Dr. Assou. So I will follow your guidance and switch to French. Okay, since time is scarce, je vais parler en fait comme Larry vient de le dire, d'un point de vue d'une organisation publique internationale qui est l'IFDC. Donc déjà, je vais dire, qu'est-ce que nous faisons avec le secteur privé? Parce que l'IFDC, en fait, en étant une organisation publique internationale, offre un appui, disons, de 360 degrés pour ceux qui font de la géométrie. C'est-à-dire qu'on travaille avec tout le monde. Travailler avec tout le monde, c'est avec le secteur privé, la recherche, les gouvernements, etc. Donc ça, c'est une chose. Maintenant, qu'est-ce que nous faisons avec le secteur privé? C'est de les appuyer. Déjà dans le management, les appuyer dans l'environnement à développer leur marché. Maintenant, je vais être plus concret à travers l'exemple d'une étude que nous avions faite quand j'étais au BAM pour le compte d'ANAPRI. On va prendre l'exemple du programme de subvention des engrais au Sénégal. Bon, l'analyse que nous avions faite, c'était que le secteur privé s'est approprié ce programme. Et je pense que c'est la même chose dans beaucoup de pays. Le secteur privé a hérité, c'est un autre schéma un peu différent du paradigme, c'est approprier le marché, je veux dire fournir les semences, fournir les intrants, etc. Donc ça c'est une chose, c'est un point positif de fait que le secteur privé des engrais, non, autant pour moi, le marché des engrais, c'est le secteur privé qui se l'est approprié. Maintenant, dans notre analyse, il y a un autre problème. Le point positif, ils sont là. Le deuxième point, c'est l'environnement. Et je pense que pour faire le lien avec la présentation de Maria, le premier point, trust and communication, je pense qu'en réalité, c'est ce qui manque. Parce que le secteur privé intervient, fait le service, le fait bien, a la possibilité, a le potentiel de bien le faire, mais à la fin de la journée, l'environnement n'est pas très bien, parce qu'en fait, comme le marché est juteux pour le secteur privé, il y a des gens qui ne sont pas réellement des professionnels de l'engrais qui arrivent à pénétrer ce secteur. Donc, première chose, il faut assainir l'environnement. Et je pense que Pape Nouine en a parlé. Le deuxième point, quand on discute avec les secteurs privés, c'est le financement. Le gros problème, c'est qu'ils fournissent, ils vont contractualiser avec les banques, viennent fournir le service et à la fin, ils ont des retards de paiement. Et le problème qui se pose, c'est qu'en fait, on a de l'inefficacité dans ce secteur parce que dans la mesure où, au lieu de faire les bons investissements, d'avoir une approche normative, le secteur privé s'ajuste au retard de paiement qui leur crée des difficultés au niveau des banques à payer des amendes. Donc, pour conclure, parce que je vois que Larry me met un peu la pression, le truc c'est que le problème du financement, il faut le régler. L'environnement, c'est clé, parce qu'en fait, le bon business est corrélé avec un environnement favorable. Donc, je vais m'en arrêter là, comme le temps est scarce, mais voilà, c'est ce que je voulais dire et je reviendrai.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks. I think we are gradually running out of time. Powerful. Antinashe, thank you for stepping in at the very last minute. So from your experience, what has been the key drivers in successful partnerships between farmers and private companies? How do you think these partnerships can be made much more mutually beneficial?
Thanks, moderator. Quite an ambush by Tinashe, but yeah, I will try to address a few. Maybe a few things that I want to say before I get to the question. Say, very often farmers or farmers organizations have been viewed, or they are still being viewed as beneficiaries of all these processes. But what I think is actually that farmers organizations, I mean, as an umbrella body representing farmers, are actually an important stakeholder, especially in conversations to do with policies or partnerships. Then the other thing that I also want to say that we are focusing, or developmental agendas are focusing more on maybe putting money into the agricultural sector and all that, but I think there's so much value that can be unlocked by even taking all the money that is going into the agricultural sector and driving backbone infrastructure development. We have farmers that are staying in far-flung places and they are producing a lot of agricultural commodities that are rotting, and we heard this morning about greenhouse gases that are coming from food losses and all that. So maybe there's need for some kind of paradigm shift and say, let's take money that we are putting in supporting farmers and go and make roads and infrastructure and other backbone infrastructure like ICT that can unlock a lot of value, and farmers can actually start to find themselves getting to the markets. Maybe getting back to your question, yeah, the relationship between the private sector and farmers is mainly very, I would say, very unfair in the sense that farmers are always price takers. They don't really they don't have that muscle or capacity to actually impose themselves and say, this is what we want. We can take examples of inputs such as fertilizers and all that. Recently we had a conference where we were looking at the impact of the projected climate change by the IPCC in Southern Africa. And what we heard there was that the focus is more on farmers and farmers organizations just being participants. And maybe that's why PAFO is not even here. It's like when you want to maybe abuse farmers, that's when you bring them in. When you want to use them as a market, that's when you start to think that they are an important stakeholder. But very often they are left out in all these conversations and all that. So the policies that are eventually put in place are really not talking to the needs of them, especially smallholder farmers. And they are the majority, especially when you go to Southern Africa. And I think many other parts of Africa as well. So the relationship arrangements should really start to change.
Yeah.
If you are going to unlock a lot of value from agricultural production and other related issues. I'll stop there. You said you are brutal when it comes to time. So.
Thank you so much for rising up to the occasion. Again, he has actually added to the to-do list for ANAPRI centers. There's a lot of work you can also do in creating that win-win situation between private sector and the farmers. Please put your hands together for our panelists. I will not take any questions from you guys now because I need to bring in the last set of panelists. And so thank you so much.
The picture?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll still take photos.
While our esteemed moderator and panelists are going down, I wanted to just check with the technical team. I suspect there are a number of questions that we are getting from our online participants, which, okay, it's fine, right? Okay,
yeah.
Great.
At the end of this last fireside chat, we'll do one round of questioning. So let's invite our last set of panelists, Professor Peter Quote, Director of ISA Ghana, and please put your hands together for him as he comes in, and Dr. Ndeye Faye from ISRA Bama. Right, so both of them will articulate the perceived and actual role of agricultural policy think tanks or research organizations in facilitating private sector engagement. So we know that think tanks or research organizations such as ISA and ISRA Bama play a pivotal role in policy analysis and execution. How do you work with both governments and private businesses to ensure that these policy recommendations are grounded in reality and lead to measurable outcomes? And are there expectations from the private sector for policy think tanks or research organizations to play an increasingly expanded role in driving policy reform and implementation? You have 3 minutes for each of you. Who wants to go first? Okay, Prof.
Thank you very much. Do you want a keynote or short answer?
I'm sure you know the answer.
Yes, thank you very much for the interesting question. It seems loaded, but I'll just touch on the, that is grounded in your question, that our policy recommendations are grounded in reality. But first, you have to position yourselves very well as a think tank. Position yourself in terms of your credibility, position yourself in terms of being non-partisan. Once you have that stature, then it is easier for government, private sector to engage with you. So that's the key thing I could mention. Secondly, we normally do what we call inception meeting. I mean, if we are developing any collaboration, whatever, we have an inception meeting. So that is where we co-develop the whole evaluation, research, as to be more relevant. Otherwise, if you come out with whatever policy, outcomes, strategies, and it doesn't sit very well with the reality, it is not acceptable or it's not accepted. So we start by building consensus right from the very onset. Then we also move on to dissemination. Having found whatever grounded our research in methodologies that are sound, we then do dissemination. With dissemination, we have different forms. Some includes inviting them to validate your findings to make sure, yes, they sit well with your recommendations or your outcomes. And we also prepare policy briefs that we know policymakers are very busy people. CEOs of private organizations are very busy people. They will not read your technical report, and they are very honest with it. They will tell you, yes, so give us a short, recommendation that they can grasp within a few minutes and run away with it. So we do all of this and many other forms of dissemination. I'll stop here for now.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Okay, thank you, Larry. So I will switch to French, just giving the time to our colleagues to put on their headsets. And I have the honor to be the last panelist of this conference, so I am... So I deserve a gift, 1 minute more. So I will switch to French. Je pense que mes réponses seront structurées comme le professeur Peter Quartet. D'abord, comment on engage le gouvernement, le secteur privé dans nos activités de recherche. Donc nous, en tant qu'ISRABAM, le gouvernement, c'est naturel parce qu'on fait partie du ministère de l'Agriculture. Donc nos activités, de façon naturelle, s'alignent aux priorités du ministère. En tout cas, on fait de notre mieux et il y a eu des expériences là-dessus, comme le projet d'appui aux politiques agricoles qui était piloté par le ministère, mais toutes les activités de recherche étaient coordonnées, la quasi-totalité était coordonnée par le BAM. Donc les activités de terrain, c'est nous qui les faisions, c'était autour des chaînes de valeur céréalières, mais aussi les semences. Et dans ce projet aussi, on a eu le secteur privé dans nos activités, parce que tout ce qui concernait le secteur semencier, on a vu près de 100 multiplicateurs de semences et centres de triage, discuter avec eux. Donc ça, c'est dans la phase recherche, collecte de données. En tant qu'unité du ministère, de l'ISRA, on travaille, on collecte des données auprès de ces acteurs-là et de deux façons, qualitative et quantitative. On en a parlé ce matin. Donc, dans le keynote presentation, les focus groups, les exercices, ce qu'on appelle la modélisation d'accompagnement, sur lesquels nous sommes appuyés par le CIRAD, où on appelle les acteurs, on essaie de voir de façon qualitative leurs attentes et on discute avec eux. Il y a aussi eu l'expérience de la panification, Dr. Jay en parlait. Ça, c'était quand même une expérience intéressante en termes d'interaction avec le secteur privé. On a enquêté 40 boulangers. Ensuite, on a eu des échanges avec eux. Ils sont dans un processus de modification du décret qui impose l'incorporation des céréales dans la panification. Et les boulangers, au final, nous, on a senti un partenariat. Ce n'est plus des enquêtés. Ce n'était plus des enquêtés. Et je me rappelle, lors de l'atelier de restitution, le président de la fédération, qu'est-ce qu'il nous a dit? Là, c'est vous qui l'avez dit, on va amener ça aux décideurs. C'est la recherche qui l'a dit, donc on vous croit. Et là, on a senti cet engagement-là d'aller avec nous, et même par la suite, on est en train de discuter avec eux pour qu'ils financent des activités de recherche au niveau du BAM. Ça, c'était la réussite de ce projet. Maintenant, en termes de dissémination aussi, on interagit avec eux. On fait ce qu'on appelle les MAD du BAM. Et durant ces événements-là, il y a tous les acteurs. Et souvent, après les MAD du BAM, on reçoit beaucoup de demandes de recherche de la part à la fois du secteur privé, mais aussi du gouvernement. Voilà, merci.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks to both of you for keeping to time. I'll take two questions, two burning questions. In the meantime, I would ask Dr. Calabar to please get ready to come summarize this session for us. Two questions. I got one hand there. Any other hand? Oh, thank you, guys, for actually helping me save time. Please, could you take the microphone to him?
Bonjour toute la salle, bonjour à l'assistance, bonjour au présidium, bonjour aussi aux modérateurs. Je remercie Assou aussi pour votre bonne organisation. Nos étrangers sont très contents de cette organisation. J'ai suivi les 3 jours des panélistes, j'ai suivi la salle, j'ai suivi les orateurs, mais il y a certaines choses que je n'ai pas entendues, par exemple. Les grands problèmes des agriculteurs, par exemple l'accaparement des terres en Afrique, et les conflits entre les éleveurs et les agriculteurs. Dans cette salle, ils ont fait le plaidoyer des agriculteurs. Puisque quand vous organisez dans des conférences comme ça, il faut inviter des agriculteurs, c'est eux qui sont dans le terrain. Parce que dans le terrain, l'agriculteur, par exemple, si on a parlé de changement climatique, c'est l'agriculteur qui connaît les bonnes semences et les mauvaises semences. La dégradation des terres sur les changements climatiques, les inondations, les pluies qui gâtent les récoltes. Il y a aussi les oiseaux migrateurs, les rats qui rongent, qui déterrent les récoltes, et beaucoup de choses pour les producteurs. Ça, il faut éviter les agriculteurs pour savoir ce qui se passe dans le terrain. Puisque le fonctionnaire, lui, il est dans son bureau, il a l'ordinateur, il a le climatiseur, il a sa belle villa, il a sa belle voiture, mais il ne sait pas ce qui se passe dans le terrain. C'est l'agriculteur qui est sous le soleil, qui passe, qui sait ce qui se passe sur le terrain. Parce qu'on a fait beaucoup de déclarations. Les déclarations de Nairobi, qui diffèrent de la déclaration d'Abuja, la déclaration de Malabo, de Kampala, mais toutes ces déclarations, des fois, on organise des forums, des séminaires, des conférences. Mais il faut qu'il y ait une exécution de suivi. Parce que, par exemple, j'ai entendu qu'on parlait qu'on va aller à la COP16 en Arabie Saoudite, à Riyad, mais on n'a pas parlé des propositions qu'on doit amener à Riyad. Puisque à Riyad, par exemple, si on arrive là-bas, il y a des grandes puissances, parce qu'il y a quelqu'un qui m'a dit que 40 000 personnes sont invitées par l'Arabie Saoudite. Ah. Je lui ai demandé, est-ce que c'est dans un stade qu'on va organiser ou bien dans une salle? Il m'a dit que c'est dans plusieurs salles. Je lui ai dit oui, parce que la Chine populaire même, l'Assemblée nationale de la Chine populaire même, ne fait pas 40 000 places. Parce qu'on a parlé de la ZLK, de la COP16, bon, les partenaires
I will have to stop you there.
Actuellement, nous allons vers l'intelligence artificielle. Nous allons vers l'intelligence artificielle.
I would have to stop you there because of time. Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Please. No, but he made some very valid points there. We need to engage the farmers a lot more. ANAPRI and ANAPRI members, I hope you do have interactive sessions with farmers directly. And there's a challenge there. You need to also bring the farmers up to speed. Even if you don't invite them individually to these meetings, create a session where you can let them know what these declarations are all about as well. Well, let's round up, and thank you so much to our panelists. Please give them a round of applause. And let me invite Dr. Oh, I will take photos with you, of course. Why Dr. Calabar comes up.
Should I?
I'm sure you can do this in 3 minutes.
Let's see. Are they on? Okay. One is on. Okay. Thank you, moderator. I can do in less than 3 minutes. Okay, let me not overestimate my abilities. But thanks very much. Like you said at the beginning, you were standing between closure and the session. Now you put me in between, so I need to hurry. But just in the context of this session about public-private partnership, it probably should have been the theme of this conference, because from the first session, these issues came up. I remember Dr. Nali Shebo in the localization session, the first session, when she mentioned that whose mindset needs to be changed when we're talking about funding, government, private sector. But the bottom line was everyone, private sector, government, and those who are involved. And that theme went through up until the session before this one, when we're talking about trade, that it is government that is negotiating this agreement, but it is private sector, it is the farmers, it is the businesses that are doing trade, that are transacting, that are involved in the movement of goods and services. So that partnership is given. However, the session today was just about the how, the who, and I'll get to some of those, starting with what you mentioned, moderator, basically about the love and hate relationship between private sector and government. At times, you said, these are your words, I quote, private sector is the devil. However, we need their taxes. However, we need them to create jobs. And I thought that was a very important point to make, because it really is at the center of what this is about. That relationship needs to be harnessed. It needs to get better. Of course, there will be tensions along the way. And then Dr. Wanzala went through, and I'm not gonna do a keynote address or repeat what she said, but I liked the part about the principles of successful outcomes when you're engaging private and public in those engagements. Not perfect, however, transparency is number one. In other words, you want to take out the devil issue. She mentioned open communication. What is the partnership without that communication? And collaboration is the word that even when Dr. Anthony was taking us through that exercise, collaboration was the key word, the broad word, the bigger word that kept coming even in all discussions. I thought that was very important. And the last one, obviously, respect and mutual accountability. Now the actions, quickly. From government, I think it was very clear that the examples of SEED Act in Namibia and mobile technology in Tanzania were very critical. But just going forward is that engagement needs to go forward and build stronger. The issue about the frameworks of agreements that are entered between the partnerships are critical in terms of time, in terms of when, and in terms of who. And the state, I think just the last 2 points that I want to make is that the farmers, they made a plea. From Sakau, we heard that we shouldn't invite farmers when we want to use them, but we should invite them throughout because they are a key part of this partnership. And the final point, can I make it any clearer? I mean, the passion was there about the farmers. So these are my key takeaways that I got from the session this afternoon. Thank you, moderator. I do appreciate it.
Thank you so much. So please join me in thanking, I'd like to thank all our keynote speakers, our presenters, our panelists, our rapporteurs. Please, let's put our hands together for them. I think you also need to applaud yourself. You have been engaging, you've participated, and you have been patient. And I hope this session has been extremely useful to you all. And thank you to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to moderate this session. So enjoy your tour, enjoy your lunch, safe travels to those of you traveling. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Larry. Thank you, Dr. Calabar. Thank you, everyone. We will now close these 3 wonderful, insightful, informative days. I don't know for you, but for me, it's been really, I've been learning a lot during these 3 days. Knowing that Africa's population will be doubling in 2050, I believe what we did during these 3 days are capital. And we have individual responsibilities, but also collective responsibilities. And I hope we will collaborate, like Dr. Anthony always stressed. Let us hold hands together, Africans, international partners, donors, private sector, public sector, governments, other organizations. Let us all work together for Africa. And like the ambassador would say, Viva Africa. Without further ado, help me invite Dr. Anthony Chapoto, Executive Director of ANAPRI, for his closing remarks.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to give you any keynote. It has been a great 2.5 days, and let me say thank you to those who have praised all these. I mean, our days, I think, have been very hectic. I think we're ending almost 22 hours every day. We have stakeholders that had to leave after the first day, which is, I mean, we expected that because they had to rush home to be with family for Thanksgiving for our American colleagues. There are others who have to leave soon after this session. And there are others who have to stay so that we can go to the island and have some hospitality from our host, Senegal. See, the 3 days for me couldn't be a success if we didn't work with a number of partners. You know, they always say that if you want to go far, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go with others. And that is what we at ANAPRI are trying to do. That's our vision, to ensure that we partner with other institutions that have either similar or that are within the space where we work. We also want to make sure that we work closely with our governments, because the government is very important, because they're the policymakers. And I'm pleased, I think the farmer was very passionate. And let me say, in ANAPRI, you have your friend. Our centers thrive to work with you and all those that when we write our papers and talk about impact, we want to work with those that are affected. And I always say we interface with food almost 3 or 4 times a day. So farmers cannot just be there. They are the ones who are responsible for our upkeep every day. So they need to be part of the conversation. This is why we, as ANAPRI, in partnership with the African Union, and also we are bringing a coalition together to make sure that we implement the Farmer Know Your Soil, because this takes us to the level where we have to discuss with the farmers. It's happening in Zambia, and I can tell you that it's fantastic. When you discuss with those farmers, you learn quite a lot, and your research becomes even more richer and more relevant. It's not just the R squared or the significance level, no, or the distribution. It's about real people, real things, and also you nuance your findings with real things in the field. Private sector. You see, I have always said that with private sector, these guys are in business. If it doesn't pay, they won't work with you. So you have to try to, you see, that value proposition. What is it that you are bringing them on board for them to support you? And I'm pleased I managed to convince one private sector to fund one of the activities here, ISDA. I said, you are in this soil space, and I want you to come and interact with our researchers. And we are setting up a Farmer Know Your Soil. And I know I had been working with them over time, trying to develop this thing. And they said, yep, we'll give you something. But I always say to Bruce, you gave me too little. Next time I want more. Thank you very much, ISDA, for the support. And our colleagues at AGRA. I reached out to some colleagues and I said, you see, we have this session on trade and markets. Can we partner? And that's why I say when you have colleagues and partners and people you talk to, they said, we'll come back to you. And guess what? After they came back, they promised me just a little. But after discussing more, they gave me much more. And thanks, AGRA, for that. And I'm sure we will continuously develop our relationship to ensure that we get there as African partners. FAO, the same thing. We went through a discussion. When we partnered on the last session, that is the first session of today, we partnered with FAO, and the conference became a success. CADESA, we discussed, and they managed to put some resources to fund government people to come to this conference. Our host is Rabam. I tell you, you know, it's I have been what's called blown off. Is it blown off or blown away? What is it? I don't know which was correct. The center has been fantastic. They put resources on the table. I know as to talk about who within Senegal helped put these resources on the table. We have a banner, I think, that it talks about all our funders. I may not be able to articulate everyone. Our centers themselves, they funded people to come to this conference. Our partners funded themselves to come to this conference. Let me say, on behalf of the board, that I'm very thankful, and as the executive director of the Secretariat, we are innovating each day. We are trying to have programs and projects that support our centers. I think you saw 2 initiatives being launched here. Next time you'll find that we want to try to report results from those initiatives. What are we doing on Farmer Know Your Soil? What are we doing on the Modeling Service Center? Because it's very important to always give feedback as we implement these new projects. I think
I would like to stop there and invite my chair to Dr. Thomas Philip. He's my boss. I would like him to do the official closing remarks. Thank you.
Dear conference participants, as we approach the end of our three-day 11th ANAPRI conference, on behalf of the ANAPRI Board of Directors, I would like to once again thank all of you who participated physically in this conference and those who participated virtually during our three-day conference. I would also like to once again thank our center here in Senegal, that is ISRABAM, for accepting to host the 11th ANAPRI Stakeholders Conference for our network. They have made every effort, as the ED said, to make sure that this conference is a great success. And I would like to thank them very much for the efforts they have made in order to ensure that our 11th ANAPRI Stakeholders Conference is held successfully. And as the ED said, there are a number of stakeholders, other stakeholders and partners who in one way or the other have facilitated this conference in various ways, including funding. And just like our center in Senegal, I would also like to take this opportunity to thank them very much for their contributions in making sure that the 11th annual stakeholders conference of our network, that is ANAPRI, is held successfully here in Dakar. During the past 3 days, we have discussed a number of issues which are crucial for the agricultural policy space in Africa. The conference, among other things, managed to showcase the good work being done by our 16 centers in Africa. And I would like to urge the centers to continue doing the good work they have done, which we have witnessed during the 3 days, the result of that work. And by doing so, I believe that the relevance of our network to various stakeholders within and outside Africa will be enhanced. And during the 3 days, as the ED said, we have also, in addition to the presentations, which we listened to here and the various discussions, we also witnessed the launch of two main things. And on Tuesday, there was a launch of the Farmer Know Your Soil initiative. And yesterday, there was another launch for the Modeling Service Center. And the Modeling Service Center is very important for our network, as we as a network, in order to ensure that we produce quality work, which is important for quality advice, policy advice that is, we need to have the right tools in place. And I believe the Modeling Services Center will enhance our ability to do the job we are supposed to do as a network by generating the evidence required to advise the policymakers in agricultural sector in Africa. After saying that, I would like to once again thank all of you for taking interest in our work, participating in our conferences and other activities we do as a network. And I would like now to thank you very much for your kind attention to my brief closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Philip. We will now invite Dr. Asujao Kamara for her closing remarks.
Merci. Ça veut dire ce que ça veut dire.
I invite you to put your headphone because I will speak in French. It will be the last speech, the last official form of speech in French for our conference. Merci à tous. Cher président du conseil d'administration de ANAPRI, chers collègues, distingués invités, mesdames et messieurs, au nom du directeur général de l'ISRA, au nom de toute l'équipe organisatrice de cette conférence et à mon nom propre, directrice de l'ISRA-BAM, membre de ANAPRI, je tiens à vous remercier chaleureusement pour votre participation active et votre engagement tout au long de cette conférence. Nous avons vu au cours de ces derniers jours, nous avons exploré ensemble des thématiques cruciales pour l'avenir des politiques agricoles et de développement en Afrique. Vos contributions ont non seulement enrichi toutes les discussions, donc tous les panels qui se sont succédés, mais elles ont également jeté les bases de nouvelles idées et collaborations pour répondre aux défis qui nous attendent. Je voudrais souligner deux choses qui m'ont marqué ces 3 jours. Ô combien les perspectives que nous partageons au regard de la diversité des contributions, que ce soit des chercheurs, des décideurs, des politiques, nous nous rendons compte que les solutions locales et adaptées sont essentielles pour répondre aux besoins de nos communautés africaines. La deuxième chose est que cette conférence des parties prenantes de ANAPRI montre la force du réseau et la force du consortium. Cette conférence a démontré une fois de plus l'importance de la collaboration. ANAPRI n'est pas seulement un réseau de recherche, c'est une communauté qui œuvre ensemble pour façonner un avenir meilleur. Pendant 3 jours, nous avons parlé de comment est-ce qu'on peut accompagner les transformations de nos économies agricoles. Alors que nous clôturons cette édition, je vous invite à considérer au moins une chose, que le véritable impact de cette conférence repose sur la manière dont nous traduirons nos idées en action. Cela a été dit dès l'ouverture. Passons de la politique à l'action. Il faudrait que dans les actions, dans les étapes à suivre, qu'on passe à l'action. On va continuer de discourir, on va continuer d'analyser, on va continuer d'échanger avec nous, mais comment est-ce qu'on passe à l'action? C'est, je pense, ce qu'on doit considérer. Et dans cet esprit, continuons à partager nos ressources et nos pratiques pour maximiser notre impact. C'est ça l'intérêt d'être un réseau. Renforçons notre partenariat avec les décideurs politiques, le secteur privé, les organisations communautaires, pour garantir que nos travaux de recherche influencent réellement et le terrain et les politiques publiques. Donc soyons les ambassadeurs d'une Afrique où l'agriculture est synonyme de résilience, d'innovation et de prospérité pour nous. Nous avons été soutenus dans cette conférence, donc Anthony l'a rappelé, par plusieurs partenaires. Moi, je voudrais ici remercier nos partenaires locaux qui nous ont accompagnés depuis qu'ils ont su que le Sénégal était membre de ANAPRI. Depuis qu'ils ont su que le Sénégal allait accueillir cette conférence, ils nous ont dit « Venez nous voir, on va échanger » parce qu'ils sont conscients de l'intérêt d'être dans un réseau comme ça. Je voudrais nommer la présence de l'USAID au Sénégal, qui nous a beaucoup accompagnés, non seulement au-delà des financements, c'est un accompagnement dans la réflexion. Je tiens à remercier M. Pape Ndiaye, présent dans la salle. Son accompagnement est précieux. Il a été ancien directeur du BAM, donc BAM un jour, BAM toujours. Merci Pape. Je voudrais également remercier les institutions à la fois publiques, privées, avec qui nous travaillons au Sénégal, mais également dans la région en Afrique de l'Ouest. Vous avez pu remarquer, on a voulu inviter nos partenaires du Conseil agricole, nos partenaires des universités locales qui sont ici présents dans la salle. L'idée que nous avons, ce réseau doit grossir. Comment ferons-nous pour qu'en Afrique de l'Ouest, ANAPRI puisse avoir un ancrage vrai et un ancrage efficace? Donc je vous invite, chers partenaires qui êtes parmi nous ici à réfléchir à comment est-ce que vous pourriez cheminer avec nous dans nos ambitions. Je voudrais appeler le dernier panel à rejoindre ce présidium, parce qu'on a un dernier panel. Alors, Mrs. Kafouki, on vous appelle ici. Revenez nous joindre dans le présidium. Kafouki, Harriet, j'improvise un dernier panel. Fama, Marie-Danielle, Soratil, Omar Lo, Adetola, Chris. Nous vous appelons. Je voudrais des applaudissements pour cette équipe, parce que c'est cette équipe qui a organisé la conférence. Nous vous remercions beaucoup. Cette équipe a travaillé depuis 1 an. Le lendemain de la déclaration de l'accueil de la conférence à Dakar, ils se sont mis en contact, que ce soit le secrétariat de ANAPRI, nos collègues de ICER, et puis l'équipe locale ici à Dakar, qui ont travaillé d'arrache-pied depuis, ça fait 1 an. Donc nous vous remercions et félicitations. Enfin, je vous souhaite un très bon retour chez vous, beaucoup de succès dans vos efforts et gardons le contact et poursuivons cette belle dynamique. Belle virée touristique pour ceux qui iront à Gorée cet après-midi. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Thank you to our dear Dr. Anthony, Dr. Damas, and Dr. Astujao for your closing remarks. I'd like to stress that communication is not just, as a communications professional, communication is not just exchanging information. It's about building bridges, creating understanding, and driving action. As Dr. Astu said, let us all start the action. Today, we communicate, for these 3 days, we communicated, we exchanged. Now is the time for action. Thank you all for your active participation and for being part of this journey. Together, let's continue to champion collaboration, amplify African solutions, and communicate a shared vision for a better future. I would like also to, for everyone that is going to Gorée Island, to bring their ID cards or passport with them. Also, we will be meeting up at 2:45 at the reception in order to leave. And I have one last activity for everyone. In Senegal, when we depart from somewhere, we say, "Maa ngi ñibbi." And I have like a short song I made for you to say "Maa ngi ñibbi." And it's, "Merci beaucoup, bye bye, ñoo ngi ñibbi." Are you ready to say it? "Merci beaucoup, bye bye, ñoo ngi ñibbi." I want to hear you all say in 3. "Merci beaucoup, bye bye, ñoo ngi ñibbi." 1, 2, 3. "Merci beaucoup, bye bye, ñoo ngi ñibbi." Thank you.